because it's so big and so full of opportunities. Like, again, like reiterate that I had no idea that was even a possibility for the type of degree that I was getting and like my background and all that. In this food and beverage industry, there's so many avenues someone can take. There's packaging is part of the food and beverage industry, just getting the machines. Like if you're an engineer, that's also like designing all the machines that will be able to accelerate the processes. Or food science, then you can create the recipes to create the products. And if you're just microbiology or something, then you can do quality and you can do optimization of products. So I think it's an industry that hasn't been that popular, and I really don't understand why, because once you see all the possibilities and all the opportunities that are within it, it's just so open and broad and you can do so many things.
Welcome to episode 25 of the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and hospitality industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a molecular science graduate student and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Luna Guiot, Brewing Quality Assurance Analyst with Labatt Breweries of Canada. Labatt is one of Canada's leading brewers and has a portfolio of more than 60 beers, with 9 breweries across Canada. Her brands include Budwiser, Stella, Artois, and Alexander Keith's. On this episode, Luna gave me the rundown on what she does as a quality analyst and the taste properties which are important in a high-quality beer. She actually went to school for biology with a specialization in molecular and genetics. It wasn't until her internship at a dairy company that she got interested in food and decided to make the transition. Luna explains why in the episode and how her curiosity has led her to getting interested in business and deciding to get 2 master's degree in business management. I think this is a great episode for you biologists out there because Luna made some really good points on why people in biology are important to the future of the food industry. Luna was a pleasure to talk to, and you can just hear the enthusiasm in her voice that she is excited about innovation in the food space. I can't wait to see what comes next in her career path. So enough with that introduction, let's get on to the show. Hi Luna, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm again excited to have you on here. I think as we were talking before the episode started, the company that you work for is a very near and dear one for my family, strangely enough. To have someone who's actually working at the company that we hold so dear, I'm excited to have you on the show. So thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. I'm very excited to be here too.
Could you please tell me about where you work and what your role is there?
Yeah, so I work at Labatt Breweries here in London, Ontario, and I work as a brewing quality analyst. You can say my role involves both the sensory analysis and the analytical part in the lab.
So if you could you maybe break that down a little bit more in terms of sensory in that?
Yeah, so actually in 2019 is when I first started working with the company, and I was working as a sensory coordinator. And the position basically entails making sure that the beer is not only analyzed quantitatively, but also qualitatively. So in the sensory panels, panelists are trained to know how to taste the beer and make sure that it passes the sensory parameters. So whether the beer it's supposed to taste like it should, depending on the different brands. So my role in sensory is to set up the sensory panels for the panelists to come and assess the beer. And in the lab, as a technician, I just make sure to analyze the beer again in a quantitatively form. So getting the data of like the different parameters to not only analyze like subjectively, you can say sensory can be a little bit subjective, but also objectively with numbers in the lab. So I do both roles, and it's been pretty interesting so far.
I know that you were mentioning earlier that you have like a broad range of beers that go through your facility, but when looking for a good quality beer or something that's up to standards, what are some of the things that you look for?
Basically, what you want to make sure is that there is a balance between the different parameters. So different beers have different characteristics or just profiles is what they're called. So there's a balance between the aroma and the flavor, and that with like specific parameters for anyone that is in the brewing industry, diacetyl, acetaldehyde, those type of things that can be byproducts of fermentation or just part of the process. So you want to make sure that depending on which type of beer you're getting, there's a balance between all of the parameters that at the end will give the beer its unique taste. So for example, when you compare a very light beer with a dark beer, not only is visual, of course, but when you taste, like, there will be fuller body, the taste can be stronger or lighter, and that will be depend on like the malt and how the fermentation went. And then throughout the process we analyze to make sure that the different limits of the parameters are going as they should, so that at the end you have a beer that balances all the type of flavors and aromas that you can have that give the beer its uniqueness, if that makes sense.
It does. Actually, that sounds really fun to be able to explore all these properties of just like, we say beer, but oh my gosh, there's so many different kinds and variations and specifications for each one. So to get to really know it in depth, it sounds really fun.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting, and you have the opportunity to like talk to the operators and to talk with the people in the brewing team and just ask questions of how does the process go and how different beers end up tasting so different. So for people that really know beer, they will, when the beer has a, for example, the diacetyl is very high, or like the just like the aromatic, like the fruit flavor types of the beer are also quite high, like when there are variances, people that know and that prefer a type of beer will notice those differences, like if you have a specific beer that you like a lot, and then if there's any time like a deviation in the flavor, you will notice it, and that all has to do with how the process goes.
I could imagine, I know, especially for brewing, like even minor changes in terms of like the length of time it ferments or the temperatures, like I guess a trained person, or like you said, someone who operates the machinery, they would definitely be able to pick up on those, I would imagine.
And for sensory panels, for example, the panelists do get trained to get a lower threshold for the different parameters so that they can be more sensitive to those type slight changes that a regular consumer will pick up. And then, I mean, my role is quality. So at the end of the day, what we want to make sure is that when people buy a specific beer, they're getting what they're paying for. So all our analysis and all our processes are trying to make sure that you get a consistent type of beer, so that when someone goes and buys Bud, for example, Budwiser versus Labatt Blue, they will get exactly what they are purchasing.
For sure. And one of the things I was curious about with you is that I know that you went to Western University and you were in biology and molecular, biology, molecular, and genetics. And I was kind of curious how you made that transition into being in, working at a really cool company, Labatt.
Yeah, so as you said, my background is quite, I mean, not typical, I guess, for the industry. A lot of people will be in the food sciences or even microbiology. Mm, I went to school and I just did bio, and then I specialized in genetics and molecular. But I ended up in the food and beverage industry because in between my third and my fourth year, I did an internship. So I decided to take the science internship program, and I wanted to explore the private sector instead of just academia. And I actually work with Parmalat. I don't know if you're familiar with the company. I mean, now it's called Lactalis. So I work in the dairy industry, and in that position I worked as a sensory coordinator also and a biologist, and I learned on the job what it actually meant to work in the food and beverage industry. Like, it never really crossed my mind. Like, as a consumer, you really don't think about what it goes behind the things you eat, the things you purchase in that industry. But then when you work in it, like, you really get to see everything that needs to come into play when you are developing a product and when you just want to get into the market these different types of food and beverage products. So I started just because I wanted to explore the private sector, and the position in the company looked very cool. Like it was the microbiology and sensory, and it gave me a lot of opportunity to learn about an industry that I had no idea about. And then I realized it's a very cool industry and there's lots of opportunities, and I just did not know that that was a thing. And then I
Mhm.
just decided to continue on that area because I had my experience in sensory. That's when I applied after graduation for the sensory position at Labatt. Then I worked from August 2019 to January, and I got into my master's program. And then because of COVID, it got kind of interrupted, and so I decided to go back and work for a while, and I just contacted who was my previous manager and I asked if there was an opportunity to be back, and the opportunity was also in the lab, so I came back.
That's the perfect use of the timing, and it's interesting that you pivoted into the workplace, considering I know a lot of people actually wanted to pivot and go into back to school because of everything that's happened. So it's interesting that you decided to go working. And I think that another thing that is pretty cool about your story is that during your internship that you got into the sensory role, because that is a very specialized role, even within the food industry. And
Mhm.
I think it's really fascinating, the idea of how some companies, or how with food products, that you can take something that seems so subjective, like you said, being sensory, but then being able to really make it into a science, with data to back it up.
Yeah, for sure. Like it was very surprising to see how much goes into it. Like again, as a consumer, you really don't think about it. But when you're working in the industry and you get to see how many different tests and like type of assessments you have to do before a product even hits the market. And like you said, like sensory is actually quite specific. Like people go to school and specialize in sensory, and by any means, like I'm not an expert, but I have had the really good opportunity to get exposed into that area. I must say though that it's very different, of course, between like dairy and beer. Like dairy, you have first of all multiple type of products. So you have yogurt and you have cheese and you have milk and chocolate milk, and just like different dairy derivatives and stuff. So the potential or like the type of assessments that you do are a little bit more extensive in the sense that the flavor additives, or if you're adding fruit to yogurt, like when you mix yogurt with fruit and all that, when the product developers are developing that type of product, they want to make sure you do a shelf life study. And with the shelf life study, you paired with the sensory study to make sure that the product is acceptable within the sensory parameters. So I learned about how to, for example, how to do a triangle panel and how to really score and scale up like the how panelists will score the different products and what type of information does that give product developers to keep developing their products or pivot into something different.
So it sounds like there is a lot that's involved in terms of sensory. And for those who might not be, like we said, it's specialized. So for those who aren't familiar with it, could you maybe give example of how a sensory panel might work, or just give an example of a test you would do as a sensory analyst?
Yeah, so first of all, depending on the industry, it might vary a little bit. So I again have experience with dairy and beer. What is similar for both is that the scale you use to measure or to rank or score a product is the hedonic scale. So it goes from 1 to 9. And then depending on the product, you want to hit a specific target. So then again, it goes with when you have trained panelists, they will be more susceptible to certain parameters. So, for example, in the dairy industry, you want to make sure you, depending on the product you have, you don't want to have too many like acidic or sour notes, or you want to control like how sweet a product is. And things like that. So you will have those specific parameters to rank. So like how sweet is something, how viscous. So, and then sensory encompasses not only the flavor, but like the flavor is broken into the texture and the mouthfeel and just the aftertaste. So those, it's a whole experience. You start with the aroma and then you actually go and like taste the sample, and then you have to be very mindful of what is happening in your mouth in terms of like, is it very sweet, is it very acidic, is it sour, is it
Mhm.
astringent? So that was for me very interesting. Like I never thought there was so much thought behind a product, but I mean in real life that's what we do. As a consumer, you will, try a new product and taste it and you're like, oh, I like it and I don't like it. And then
Mhm.
sensory is like when you're doing a quality sensory analysis, is not I like it or I don't like it, but more like what is it that is triggering? Is it like sweet or sour or bitter or whatever? And then in the beer, there are like less parameters in a sense, because again, you're more concerned about, for example, like how fresh it feels in your mouth, how the aroma, but there's less, for example, texture is just will be like the carbonation, instead of, you'll never have to discuss
Mhm.
like viscosity in beer. If that's a thing, then there's something very wrong.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. If you were getting a beer that was kind of chunky, that would be very bad.
Yes, exactly.
So we've been spending a lot of time talking about sensory, but I did want to move the conversation into another place because we haven't actually really talked much about what you're doing currently, because sensory is a component of what you do. But I also wanted to talk about, in terms of being a quality assurance analyst, I just wanted to get your opinion because it sounds as though you're quite happy with what you're doing. So I wanted to hear first from you. What are some of the things that you love about your job?
I really like the fact that I get to follow the beer from when it's brew all the way to finished product. So then you get to see how the liquid and the process is progressing. And then you have to like piece together, like you can predict how the finished product will be based on like how it goes in the fermenter and in aging. So that I like to see the big picture but understand
Mhm.
how each step is unique and how each step is so important, and like which things are crucial indicators of what is going to happen next. So I really like seeing, like getting the information of what is happening throughout the process. I give the data to the brewing team and then they can troubleshoot and then they can be proactive for the next brews or things like that. So like I know that the information that I'm getting will serve the brewing team to make the decisions that they need to adjust or to make sure that the beer is at the end of the day what it should be. So I really like seeing that big picture and like following from beginning to end.
I love that. I know when I was working at the peanut factory I was working at, and just seeing from shipping how these raw peanuts all of a sudden are these candied peanuts by the end, and seeing how each little step makes a difference. I gotta agree with you. It's pretty cool. And especially for something like beer where it feels like you're just taking a big vat of water and turning it into this like really amazing product. It's like, how can just by adding a few things to this large amount of water becomes that?
Yeah, for sure. And it's quite interesting at the beginning, like in any job, I was like, I was just learning what I needed to do. And then the more information to get, the more you can piece things together. And then you get like this big picture and you're like, oh, like from this step to this step, there's this change. And then
Mhm.
from this step to the other step, you're like, oh, okay, like now I know what I need to pay attention to. And then I know how the end result will look like. So that I think is very, very interesting in my day to day.
And I could imagine as you keep going on your career path being in QA, that as you get this more experience, you're starting to able to build your own knowledge reservoir, that you start to know exactly, oh, that happened because this happened, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And then one thing that I want to point out is that at my workplace, people are very friendly and they're very open to talk. So like whenever I have a question or something, I know I can reach out to even like some of the management team, or even the operators, and then they will answer the questions. And that's how I've been piecing together all the information. So like I know, first I understand what I had to do and like what my role was, and then I start to ask questions, and then I can just piece together all the information and be like, oh, in this step this is important, and I know I need to do this because this information is going to be useful for the next step. So it's been very nice to have people I can ask questions to, and there's some people that are very knowledgeable and that they're very open to share their knowledge, and I appreciate that a lot.
Oh yeah, that makes for a amazing workplace. One of the things I was also curious about, though, I know that you do love what you're doing, but I was curious as someone who is on the newer side, let's say, to this type of role, is there any challenges that you've been actively working on, maybe for your own personal development as you go through your career?
Yeah, so, well, if I go back a little bit to a couple questions ago when I was telling you about I went back to school, I actually started my master's at Ivy for international business management, so a little bit different from like the science.
Okay.
But my whole idea is to get to combine both science and business. So when I did my internship again, I realized that just knowledge about business is also very important and it's very useful, especially when you're working in the private sector. So my idea is to combine both science and business, but to work in industries that use science to, have their business. And that, for example, the food industry is a clear example of that. Like, and in brewing, for example, like the study of fermentation and how you can make it more efficient and all that, and understanding how the process itself happens, that's using science to create and make a product, like using that
Mhm.
knowledge in applying that knowledge. With my master's, again, I just want to get like the business skills and combining with my science skills and then my experience in quality. I want to be able to work, I want to stay in the food and beverage industry, and I just want to be able to gain all this knowledge, and potentially the avenue I want to take is innovation. So product development, or just R&D for different type of products. So understanding the science that is required to develop the product, but also the business part of what is it that it's needed to be a marketable product and a product that will suit well for the consumers and that will eventually again like be popular and be saleable.
You know, I feel so silly by saying this. You just gave me like a eureka moment because when I always think, for example, I am currently going to a school program that's in molecular science for my master's degree. And, I see the perspectives of biology in that. And whenever they talk about combining science with business, I automatically think of like the medical field or think about, sorry, medical is all that comes to mind. But it never just clicked to me that even though I love food science, that essentially making a food product is, and being in a company that is combining science and foods. So it makes perfect sense that you would want to have more of that business side to combine the two.
Yeah, so that's exactly what happened to me. I was like, okay, when you have science, I think we're also very inclined to go into like the pharmaceutical industry and medicine, and I mean they're great industries as
For
well.
sure.
But food and beverage are like, they are also science. Like creating a product,
Yeah.
creating a beverage, like that's the use of science. Like fermentation, the process itself, like that's a that's a process, like that's a pathway. Like you will know what an organism is doing and what it needs, and when you understand the science behind it, then you can also optimize it and you can make it more efficient. And when you have a science background also, you can understand what are the limitations within your business idea. So that was the whole thing. Like I like the private sector, I like the food and beverage industry, but I felt that I needed to combine my science with business because that's the avenue I want to take. Like the path is I want to be in innovation or R&D, um, to be able to know again like what are the limitations and what can I do with science and how can I apply it, but how can I make it something that is commercial, like that is it's can be commercialized, that is marketable, that will become a product that people will buy.
Hmm. So out of curiosity, why did you decide to go for a master's degree? Because I know business is offered at things like a 4-year undergraduate program, but it's also, there's MBAs, there's all these different types. I'm curious what made your decision to go for Ivy particularly and with this type of program.
So let's break it down. First, why a master's? I think I discovered that I also like business a little bit late in my fourth year. I went into my internship again between my third and my fourth. So when I came back to my fourth year, I had never taken business. So then I took one course in business in fourth year, and I really enjoyed it. And it was like, because I was at Western, I took an Ivy course, and I really enjoyed the case method type of learning. So that was also one thing. And then I had not taken any business with throughout my years, so I was already not going to be able to get any business in my undergrad. For an MBA, you need at least 2 to 3 years of work experience. And then when I was taking the business course in my fourth year, my professor also just showed what the options that Ivy had, and then they had their master's in international business management, and that was a really cool option. I also explore other options. University of Toronto has a master's of management in innovation, and Queens also have another type of master's, but I really enjoyed the case method type of studying, type of learning with Ivy. And my program also allows me to do different exchanges. So that was another reason why I decided to choose Ivy. So first, a master's because I was already quote unquote a little bit too late to get an undergrad credit or even like a minor or something in business. MBA, it's far ahead. And then just the master was very practical, and it combined the opportunity to get those business skills and also the international portion. Like I was telling you before we started recording, I am Colombian, so I came here. I also enjoyed that, connecting and understanding different cultures and understanding, being able to communicate with people from different countries, and having the option to do exchanges in my master's was also another reason why I chose Ivy.
Oh, wow. You know, that's a really good process of thought in order to decide that's something that works for you. And it's just fascinating how many different types of things that you can do in your post-secondary. I know that when you think of university, you think of the 4-year program, but to know that there's all these different ones and you can really pick one that suits your needs, that's pretty cool, especially the international portion. I like that.
Yeah, like I never really thought, like if you asked me in first year, I would have never pictured that this was going to be the path I was going to take. Um, definitely. I was very unaware of the potential and the opportunities that the food and beverage industry has. One. Second, I had no idea that I enjoyed business. And third, that I discovered then that there was a way that I could combine both. So
And for this one, you mentioned that one of the reasons you chose this particular one was you said that there was a lot of case studies. So I guess I'm just curious to know a little bit more about what you've been learning in this program.
well, the program itself, like the very first semester was just getting the basics. So they do offer marketing and strategy and accounting, finance, like the very core business courses that just to have everyone kind of like on the same level. Because the what I want to say is the masters at Ivy of it's open to anyone. Doesn't matter what background, what you studied in university, like what you did in your undergrad. So that is also very interesting because you have people with very different backgrounds. So that opens up the different perspectives, and the conversations are very interesting. But that's why on the first semester you have like the Ivy Essentials are actually that's what they're called. So like the very business core courses. And then because it was international business, I was learning about cross-cultural management. So what happens when you are working with people from different backgrounds, when you're working in a different country? How does that influence the type of job and the type of outcomes that you can have for different projects? So that area was also very cool to explore and understand. And then I think like my peers have very different paths of where they want to go with the masters. I know how I want to tailor it to. And I get that that's another plus for this type of masters is that it can be whatever you make it to. You get the business skills, but because it's open to whatever background you have, you can really tailor it to what is it that you want to do next. So
And has this program, I know we're in the age of COVID as we're recording this, but would this program be traditionally in person or would it also be online?
no, it's in person, and Ivy is very so because the case method, what it does is that it's not your typical lecture of like just presenting you the concept, but rather you have to read a case, prepare the case, and then discuss. So all of this is just very enriching when you are in person. Like, you get that opportunity to get the conversation going and the discussions with the
Mhm.
different points of view. So it's like solving the case, quote unquote. There's no real like right or wrong answer. It's
Yeah.
just opening it up to what would you have done in that case. And that's how you learn, right? Like you are in a space where you can discuss about business problems and what happened and how would you have handled it. And that's how you learn. You will listen to what others are saying about how they would do it, and then you have your own perspectives, and then the instructor, like the professor, guides the conversation, and then at the end there's a big discussion of like, okay, what happened, and then how is it different from what we were discussing in class, and all that. You just absorb that knowledge by discussing and debating and just analyzing what is happening or what can happen, could have happened. So I enjoyed that method of learning a lot.
I mean, arguably that's a better way of learning than them just presenting you with information, because not only would it teach you about the concepts, it would also, I can imagine, discussing with your peers and such. It's building those other skills about properly able to discuss your ideas, which, as you would say, in innovation is as just as important as making the ideas, actually being able to communicate it with others and making it a viable option.
Exactly, exactly. And again, because I was telling you, everyone in the classroom has very different backgrounds. Like there's people that studied chemistry, people that studied health science, others that did business in undergrad, and then like people that did other type of sciences, engineers. So then you get these very enriching conversations with different perspectives. And that's how you learn. Like I really enjoyed that type of learning and what I've been able to absorb from that, and just being able to debate your own position and why you think the way you would have done things could could end up in the desired result. So I really enjoy that, and it has been, I think all these experiences have given me the opportunity to gain different skills, and I can tailor it towards where I want to go and what I want to do in the future. And I think that's applicable for anyone in the program and pretty interesting.
So, talking to someone who loves innovation, and it sounds like you want to be somewhat of an innovator in the food industry, I was curious if there's anything that's going on in the food industry right now that's exciting you.
Actually, yes, there is a very cool area with all I don't know if you're familiar with synthetic biology and all the different type of products that are coming from that alternative. So getting, for example, dairy products without using milk, or
Mhm.
getting the Impossible Meat or Beyond Burger, all that, like it's using biology to create food and beverage products without having to have one, such a big environmental impact, and two, just a new way of thinking how we can get resources and how we can feed people. Um, with a different type of form, which I think that's where a lot of the movement is going towards like agriculture and innovation in type of products that are more sustainable and that use biology to create products, not just synthesizes it like chemically, but actually use biology to get those products. For example, I was reading about a company that they're synthesizing flavors instead of having to, you know, produce it chemically through just chemical reactions. What you do is you engineer yeast or bacteria to create these compounds, and then you can just extract them. So, for example, that area is really cool.
I think that is such a cool area that you've been mentioning. It feels like we're truly in the future. Like I feel like things like lab grown meats and all those things, like they really feel like something that you'd read in a science fiction book that would happen in like 100 years, but it really is the future here. And to be able to, I think that's an interesting point that although I'm not nowhere near a biologist, I wish that was something I'd taken more seriously in my undergrad because I focused very much on pure chemistry. But hearing how it could have benefited me now, I think if there's any biologists listening, I think they have a really exciting career if they decide to go into food.
Yeah, like there's ways to combine all this, and that's what again, I had no idea that this space existed. And it's like I have my biology background and molecular biology, and then I'm getting business skills, and then my experience in the food and beverage industry. And turns out that there's this new space where new products are coming up using biology to make commercial products. So another cool one that I was researching, it was that they're using fermentation to make nutritious like drinks. So you engineer a yeast, a type of yeast to ferment to create like beverages that are nutrient and vitamin rich. So instead of having to like add all of them in, you just put the organism to do the job, and then you just extract and have this beverage.
That is so cool. I seriously, after this conversation, I'm going to have to do some more reading up on like these new biological processes that they're combining. They're just taking it in the same way. It brings it back to the idea of beer. I mean, I know maybe it's not, but I mean, at the end of the day, beer is just a fermentation process involving yeast. I mean, there's way more complications, but that's just like a light to show where the possibilities of the future could go. If we can create high quality beer, why couldn't we do something even more?
Yeah, exactly. Like fermentation is such a process that we have been studying for so long. Like it's also used in the dairy industry, and just those type of biological processes, like biochemical processes that will give out like the products can be used instead of having to synthesize it like just chemically from like other derivatives, instead of having it just from like biology itself doing it. So I think it's a really cool area for anyone interested in researching. Like there's lots of new information coming up on that topic. Synthetic biology is something that is growing, is called the new bioeconomy and the bio revolution. And I think it's quite exciting. There's a lot of potential and a lot that can be done.
Uh, just talking to you just gets me so much more excited about seeing where this industry is going. And it's just all these new things coming out. It's so hard to keep up with all the news with all these innovations that are happening. It's crazy how fast it moves.
Yeah, but it's very exciting right now to
It
be in this position.
Yeah, and I think this would be a good point to ask this question is why do you think the food and beverage industry is a great place to work?
Just because it's so big and so full of opportunities. Like again, like reiterate that I had no idea that was even a possibility for the type of degree that I was getting, and like my background and all that. In this food and beverage industry, there's so many avenues someone can take. There's packaging is part of the food and beverage industry. Just getting the machines, like if you're an engineer, that's also like designing all the machines that will be able to accelerate the processes. Or if you food science, then you can create the recipes to create the products. And if you're just microbiology or something, then you can do quality and you can do optimization of products. So I think it's an industry that hasn't been that popular, and I really don't understand why, because once you see all the possibilities and all the opportunities that are within it, it's like it's just so open and broad, and you can do so many things. And then again, another aspect of the food and beverage industry is that regardless of how the world is and what is happening, people are gonna eat, people are gonna drink. Even with COVID, I think you can say companies that are in the food and beverage industry have not been like impacted as bad, because people are still buying the products they want to eat and consuming everything that they want to consume. So
yeah,
it's also a pretty stable industry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if anything goes to show, the pandemic, if this industry can go very strong during a pandemic, you got some job security.
Exactly.
And so with that, I think it sounds like the things that you've said, that there's a lot of places that someone can explore, and it really seems like anyone could come into this industry. They just really have to show off their skills and find a place that they can position everything they've come to, having that biology background. And you've said that in the past that you wish that you knew about more of this stuff when you were in your first year. So if you had any advice for someone maybe who wanted to go into this career field, what would you give them?
Just explore pretty simply, just think about a product that you like, something you like to eat, something you like to drink, and research a little bit about the company. And then you'll see there are these huge companies with lots of potential, lots of positions where you could apply your skills. So first year students that don't really know, or like second, third year students that start to explore, like, oh, I don't really know what I can do with my degree, the food and beverage industry will have lots of options. So just think about a product that you like and start researching about the company, and then you will see how they operate, what type of positions they can offer and all that. And you'll see that it's very vast, and there's room for everyone.
Well, I'm excited to see where your career path takes you with everything that you're doing. I'm excited to see, where you continue on with the ideas of innovation. So I think that's a good place to end this. But before I do let you go, I do want to ask you a question for the audience. If people wanted to find you, where can we find you?
Yeah, the best place to contact me is on LinkedIn. Just my name and my last name, Luna Guiot. I'm always open to talk to anyone. I really like meeting new people, talking about my career path, and just learning about how others also have encountered different opportunities. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. You heard it there. So thank you so much, Luna, for coming on the show. This conversation just really got me pumped to want to go do some dive and research just to explore, to see what's going on, because it seems like I'm missing out on a whole side of the industry that I didn't even know was really moving forward. I've known about the lab, the meats, but when you were mentioning fermentation, I was not even aware. So I'm getting pumped and I got to go do some more research. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure.
That was episode 25 of the FoodGrads Podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found on the FoodGrads website by clicking the podcast tab on the homepage. There, you can find any notes to any past or future episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, then consider leaving a review on wherever you get the podcast. There are so many options out there, and we would really appreciate it. If you haven't already, make sure to sign up for your free FoodGrads account. You can create your searchable profile, include your skills, career aspirations, multiple resumes tailored for different job opportunities, all focused on the food industry. Joining will connect you to an amazing network of food and beverage professionals, the next generation of food. Anyways, that's it for this week's podcast. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.